Welcome to episode 2 of Marketology. I'm your host, Drew Martin, and this is where we try to make you a smarter sports bettor. And when trying to make you a smarter sports bettor, a big question is when and what to bet. This time of year, I think that a beatable market is early in the season. It's a niche sport, which a niche sport and early in the season are two major things that we're looking for when looking for a beatable market. And that is the CFL, the Canadian Football League. Yes, there are some major differences when compared to American football. They have a 110-yard field, 65 yards wide. Ours is 100 by 53.5. They have 20-yard end zones, goalposts at the goal line, 12 players on the field instead of 11, 3 downs instead of 4. But once you get by those rules changes, it's still a fun game to watch. It's on ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN3, so you're able to watch what you're betting a lot of the time. And odds makers still have to put out numbers on all of these games, sides and totals. So we get an opportunity, especially early in the season, to get out in front of these line moves. We can almost prove that it's a beatable sport more so than, let's say, November NFL, where if you're betting November NFL, I'm not going to tell you not to. I'm just going to say it's a very efficient market. You're trying to beat a lot of other people that are making a very sharp number. The CFL this time of year, you're going up against the odds makers, especially early in the season, and the odds makers haven't seen these teams very much at all. In fact, only 1 week. We're going into week 2 this weekend. So if you can get by those rules changes, you can really get out in front of the volatility in the market. It's almost, I'd compare it to early in the season college basketball where we get these big moves. When looking at these CFL line moves, we're talking about -2 to -5.5 on a team, or a total going from 53.5 to 57. Sizable moves where if we can get out in front of them, I think that it's a very beatable market. I recommend betting it. I'm betting it myself and following the guys that really know this sport. We got one here at Sportsbook Review. Check him out at SBR Picks. His name's Ian Cameron. We have him on the show here. He's our second guest. He'll dive in a little bit deeper on why he likes to bet the CFL coming up next. Welcome back to Marketology. We have a special guest today. His name's Ian Cameron. He's a Canadian resident, lives outside of Toronto, and his record in the CFL is really second to none that I've ever seen. So really happy to have him aboard to answer a couple questions we have to help make you a smarter bettor in the CFL. Ian, thanks for joining us. How you doing today, buddy?
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Good to be here.
Good stuff, man. Just have a couple questions for you, and don't want to take too much of your time, but we'll get right into it. Ian, why do you feel you have a stronger edge in CFL than you do in the NFL?
Well, when it comes to Canadian Football League, Drew, the odds makers just don't have the time, energy, and quite frankly, the ability to access the resources and the information that, quite honestly, I can find in terms of coverage of the Canadian League, in terms of being able to monitor practice reports, injury reports on a daily basis, find those little subtle, player absences, player personnel changes, system changes, scheme changes, coaching changes, anything that could really impact the result of a CFL game, particularly from a betting perspective. I'm able to find that information out a lot more easily and quickly than, say, an odds maker can. And let's be honest, when you're an American odds maker for a Las Vegas book, or even if you're an offshore odds maker, it's a juggling act at this time of year. You've got baseball, you've got to worry about NFL and college football, getting ready for that season, posting futures markets for that sport. You're looking at, preparing as well for basketball, for the European bookmakers. You got soccer going on year round. So there is a lot of sports to keep everyone busy. CFL slides well below the radar in terms of attention and time put in for a lot of odds makers. And I find they're often missing things that I don't. And that's where I'm able to capitalize when it comes to betting CFL football.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I think you can almost prove it, it's like early season college basketball. There's just huge line moves. And we're talking, 5-point line moves as far as totals goes, a full field goal as far as sides. Have you noticed any big line moves and a difference in line moves this year in the CFL going from week 1 to week 2?
I have seen a lot more action and line moves in the CFL in just 2 weeks this season so far than I've seen probably in the last 2 or 3 years combined. I mean, I am stunned to see just the amount of opinion that's out there in the betting markets, that there are steep, severe line moves in a lot of cases with some of these games here in the first 2 weeks of the CFL season. I mean, we've seen 4 or 5-point moves with totals. We've seen some 4 or 5-point moves with sides. Significant movements in some of these first couple weeks of the season. And I think a product of that, Drew, is that there's more access to television coverage of the CFL, particularly in the United States and international. I know that there's an international online on-demand package to watch CFL games outside of North America. And of course, in the United States, you've got the ESPN family of networks showing games. You've got the Watch ESPN app and ESPN3, the online streaming source for ESPN that provides coverage of every single CFL regular season and playoff game. So the coverage is a lot more substantial in terms of being able to watch and observe these games than it has been in the past. And I think it's affected the amount of action.
Ian, we got into a couple strategies as far as betting on niche sports before we have you on earlier this show, and some of the differences in CFL as far as rules go, the field goals. There's also intentional safeties. Are key numbers still important as far as 3 and 4, 6 and 7, even 10, like they are in college football or the NFL? Do you have to concentrate on these key numbers in some of the maybe you can touch on some of the differences as far as rules goes for viewers if they're trying to handicap it on their own?
Yeah, the key numbers are important in the CFL, but not as important. In fact, not even close to as important as the NFL, for example, because the NFL, you've got your standard scoring plays, really. You get the odd safety, which doesn't happen often. You get field goals for 3, 6 points for a touchdown with the missed extra point, 7 points for the touchdown with the extra point, and then, of course, your 2-point converted touchdown. Those are your main scoring plays. In the CFL, if a team has to punt on 3rd down inside their own 10-yard line, they're pretty much always going to concede a safety in their own end zone, take a knee rather than punt the ball out of their own end zone. So you see a lot of intentional safeties. You almost see one per game in the CFL, and you also see the rouge come into play. What the rouge is the single point rule. The single point is basically for a missed field goal that is downed in the end zone by the defensive team or the returning team in that case, and they concede a single point off a missed field goal, and also a punt that falls into the end zone. That team, instead of returning the ball out of the end zone on a punt, risking bad field position, they'll take a knee, surrender a single point, and get the ball at much better field position up at the 25-yard line. So it's one of those situations where you get a lot of situations with 1 point and with 2-point scoring plays in the CFL, and that means betting a -3 instead of a -3.5 isn't as important. Betting a -7 instead of a -7.5, not as important in the CFL as the NFL, because you can have these odd scoring plays throwing off the key numbers and resulting in point totals for teams like 25, 22, 19, 15 point totals that you just rarely see in the NFL, and that's a major difference when you talk about betting CFL football.
Yeah, and Ian, one thing about the CFL that I was trying to get across to the listeners is it's still a market to bet big money. They'll take nickel bets, dime bets. It's not like arena football or some real niche sports, so you can make some money if you're a bigger bettor. And looking forward to this week, it looks like almost across the board, it looks like the early bets are all on the unders. Every game has moved at least 2.5 points from their opener to what BetOnline is posting right now. Some, as like we said, as high as 5 points towards the under. Are you looking towards backing these early line moves and following them, or are you going to try to kick this and start betting on the over, values towards the overs?
Well, there was 3-1 to the under last week in the CFL, and only Ottawa-Calgary, which was probably the game most people thought would have the most points, that was the only over in Week 1 CFL action, and now you're seeing a reaction to the lower scoring nature of Week 1. I mean, every game, for the most part, has been bet under the total. And Ottawa-Calgary has been some of the most insane totals movement I have ever seen in any sport. I'm not talking about just CFL anymore. I'm talking about any sport. That total opened 58.5, 59. It got hammered up to 64, a 5-point move, and it has come crashing all the way down from 64 to 55.5 in a lot of locations as we speak. This is insane, crazy, volatile line movement that I have not seen, certainly in the CFL, let alone other sports. So there is significant opinion going on. Every game pretty much now a lower total for Week 2 than where it opened at this point in time. I think it's because sometimes it takes offenses a little bit of time to get in rhythm for a new season, particularly in the CFL. I know unders last year did pretty reasonably well early on in the campaign, but I don't agree with all of the under movement. You've still got to handicap each individual game, each individual matchup, factor in injuries, factor in changes in scheme and personnel to make your own decisions. So it's still a game-by-game, case-by-case basis, but a lot of those early unders in Week 1 factoring into what we're seeing with the movement here in Week 2.
Yeah, that's the market at work. Becoming an efficient market and taking advantage of the inefficiencies early in the week. So it's interesting to see how these games play out, and like that total that you talked about. Do you have an opinion on that game?
Right now, I was able to cash an over last week with Calgary and Ottawa. There is a key injury on the Calgary side, wide receiver Tavares Daniels. I don't believe he's going to suit up this week. That could be affecting what we're seeing here. I think now there's value to look over because we went from 59 to 6. I think at 64, there's a ton of value on the under. No question about it. That's a ridiculous number as far as I was concerned. Now it's all the way down 55.5. This is insane. 59 to 64, back down to 55.5. Incredible totals movement in that Calgary-Ottawa game. I do think there's value now on the over at the current number, though.
Yeah, the market at work. There it is. Well, Ian Cameron, we appreciate you joining us, and best of luck this year betting the CFL.
Thank you very much, Drew. Good luck with the show.
Thanks for watching the second episode of Marketology, where we try to make you a smarter, better, taking advantage of these niche sports like the CFL. Hopefully you learned something and can make some money going forward before the American football season starts. And please stay tuned for the next show. It's coming up in 2 weeks on Marketology. And please use the hashtag AskSBR or hit me up on Twitter with any questions you would like answered going forward.